You want to know why I'm doing this, he whispered, about to swallow another needle. Daryl grinned, opened his mouth, and planted a second 3-inch needle onto his tongue, rolling it around the surface like a cherry stem he was preparing to tie into a knot. Left to right to left. Right to left to right. I followed the needle, helplessly transfixed by the rhythm of the movement. After a few seconds, he let the needle rest, now sticky and shimmering with saliva. I met his gaze, shaking my head no asterisk. Wordlessly, I pleaded with him, begged him to move out of the doorway and let me leave. He tilted his head back slowly, letting the golden barb slide to the edge of his throat. All the while, he stared into my eyes, savoring the panic. Please, Daryl, I don't understand. For a moment, he seemed to come to his senses. Pivoted his jaw forward, placing his hand palm up in front of his mouth like he was going to spit the damn thing out. At the same time, the wildness in his features waned. The grin melted down his face like candle wax, and his lips stopped quavering. I saw the tiniest hint of fear behind his eyes, too. It's okay, just give me my phone back. I can call an ambulance." Before I could finish my sentence, he winked, licking his lips playfully, cradling the needle in his creased tongue as he did it. In an instant, Daryl's mania returned at a fever pitch. When I realized he had only been toying with me, pretending to hear reason, my heart sank. He flung his thick jowls towards the ceiling like he was throwing back a shot of whiskey, and the needle disappeared down his throat. His mouth sputtered, coughing and choking violently as the needle tore into his esophagus, blood rising up and pooling in his cheeks. The emotion driving his expressions seemed to flicker, quickly swapping from hysteria to fear and then back again in the blink of an eye. A veritable supernova of anger was rushing to the surface, fury that I had suppressed while I pleaded my innocence, trying to appear harmless. When it bloomed, I had no hope of controlling it. "Fuck you, Daryl," I screamed, battering my fists against the steel door until they bled. I couldn't help myself. That sentence exploded out of my mouth, again and again, hoping my undead cousin on the other side of the threshold would suffocate on the steam my screams created, killing him a second time. When he responded, I think he said something like, "All right, Lenny, let's try this again." But I can't be 100% sure. I was lost in an endless maze of pain and confusion. Whatever was on the other side of the door closed the window latch and walked away. As it clicked, my cellmate began to yowl, gripping his stomach with both hands and falling out of bed. It took about a minute for the *real prison guards to hear his agony. During that time, I was confined in a small concrete box with the shrieking man. As I watched him curl up into the fetal position and roll around the floor, I found myself imagining something strange. I looked around my cell, and I imagined that I was trapped inside Daryl's black tin. If I squinted, I could even see the golden stars and spirals that had disappeared from the lid of the tin, littering the walls like an intricate mural or the incoherent scribbling of a madman. My cellmate died that night, ruptured an ulcer in his stomach out of nowhere, acid exploding over his intestines like a water balloon. Naturally, the prison decided it was my fault. They told me I made it happen. Looks like I'll be sentenced to another 20 years, maybe more. I'm posting this from the prison's computer lab to see if anyone outside my immediate orbit is unaffected by whatever Daryl has done. What's happening to me? I couldn't help but imagine the sharp tip of the needle dragging down the inside of his throat like a rock climber digging their axe into the downward slope of a mountain, trying to slow the speed of their descent. How do I escape it? Or the next time Daryl appears, do I just tell him that I understand, even though I don't? And God, I don't think I ever will. Now I'll ask you again, Lenny, do you? His sentence was interrupted by a bout of coughing so vicious that it caused him to double over, creating slightly more space between his body and the door that he had been blocking. I bolted, reaching for the knob. Right as I was about to grasp it, he snapped his hip back, sandwiching my wrist between his waist and the metal frame. A series of audible crunches filled the air, and agony detonated in my wrist like a pipe bomb. I wailed and fell backwards onto the floor. The pain was unlike anything I'd experienced up to that point in my life. A vortex of fire and electricity churning in my forearm. Trying to stabilize the pulverized joint, I wrapped my other hand around the broken wrist, staring at it in disbelief. Daryl stepped forward from the doorway. Looming over me, he bent down and gently put a meaty finger to my lips, shushing my howls. Reluctantly, my gaze lifted from my wrist to his eyes. When I finally quieted completely, he started anew. "You want to know why I'm doing this, Lenny?" In his hand, he held out a black tin about the size of a matchbox, making a spectacle of showing me the details of the case like he was about to perform a magic trick. Golden stars and spirals covered the lid, forming a hypnotic pattern that straddled the line between purposeful and anarchic. He flicked the tin open with his thumb, revealing rows and rows of golden needles. They were thin, but that only made their ends appear sharper. "Please, Daryl, I don't understand. Just stop. We can figure this out, please," I whimpered. His pace accelerated. 3 more needles onto his tongue, swallowed, fingers back into the tin. 5 more needles onto his tongue, swallowed, blood and saliva oozing over his trembling lips. On his last handful, Daryl didn't even bother to lay them all in the same direction. Some were parallel to his tongue, others were horizontal. A bramble of tiny golden harpoons that fought back every step of the way as he attempted to force them down his throat. He gulped, coughed, and wheezed, never looking away from me. So I finally gave in to his game. I asked him, Why are you doing this?" Before he buckled over, blood spilling into the empty spaces in his abdomen from his stomach turned pincushion, Daryl whispered the 4 words that have haunted me for the last half-year. Words that played on an endless loop in my mind, at the police station, in the courtroom, everywhere. He wheezed and laughed, "Because you asterisk made asterisk me." Daryl and I were born on the same day, thousands of miles apart from each other, cousins with very little in common. But the coincidence of our births connected us, because it was just that we were born on the same day. We were born on the same day, in the same hour, with the same minute listed on both of birth certificates. It may have been the same second, too. Of course, that's impossible to prove. Despite that bizarre synchronicity, our deliveries were quite different. I was born full term, as planned, without a single complication. 38 weeks and a day of gestation, exactly as the doctor predicted. From what I'm told, my labor only lasted 15 minutes. I was alive and breathing before the morphine could even be brought to the room to help my mother weather the contractions. Painless, punctual, and healthy. Daryl was not blessed with my good fortune. My cousin was born 3 months early, practically out of the blue and substantially underdeveloped. The doctors were baffled. My aunt had no risk factors for an extremely premature birth. Normally, there's some asterisk identifiable reason for it, whether it be placental abnormalities, drug abuse, or infection. But in his case, they couldn't find a single thing. He just appeared, exact same time as I did, down to the minute. Materialized from the pits of creation a whole season early so that we could cross that threshold together. As you might imagine, babies born at 26 weeks of gestation don't enter this world healthy. He was physically underdeveloped for the demands of reality. Lungs don't fully develop until at least *36 weeks, so he only existed for about a minute before a breathing tube needed to be placed down his throat. His blood vessels were exceptionally fragile, too. It was like the blood was being transported through overcooked penne rather than strong, fibrous tubing. Because of that, he bled into his brain 12 hours after they put the breathing tube in. I was born 6 pounds, 2 ounces. Daryl wasn't even born with a pound to his name. Spent the first 5 months of his life in the neonatal intensive care unit, tethered to the location by the IVs and the feeding tubes like a dog leashed to a bike rack outside a bodega, waiting patiently for their owner to come back out with a pack of cigarettes so their life could continue. Despite those hurdles, he lived. No long-term issues other than blindness in his left eye. No biologic issues, at least. The synchrony of our births became a family legend overnight. A story told over Thanksgiving dinners, in grocery store parking lots, during the coffee break after Sunday service. Over and over and over again until the flavor had been drained from the story. Gum that had been chewed tasteless without being spat out. Because of that, no one treated us like cousins. When Daryl and his family moved into my town, we were treated like twins, which introduced an element of competition between the two of us. An inevitable game of comparison perpetuated by our parents. A game that I consistently won, not that I was looking to beat him at anything. I was just living my life. My cousin never saw it that way. As a kid, Daryl was quiet, reserved, and a little socially awkward, but overall considered polite and well-behaved. That disposition was a mask that he put on for everyone but me. In mixed company, my cousin was a bashful titan. Despite his bumpy start in this life, he well surpassed my lanky frame before we were even toilet trained. But when we were alone, he dropped the act, and I got to see the strange hate that festered behind it all. "Why did you pull me out?" he said, shoving an 8-year-old me to the floor of his bedroom. I shrugged my shoulders and swiveled my head side to side, tears welling in my eyes. I don't get what you mean," wiping the snot under my nose with the sleeve of my sweatshirt. "You know what I mean, Lenny. I was floating in the jelly, minding my own business. I wasn't hurting you. I wasn't hurting anyone. But you pulled me out, reached inside what wasn't yours and pulled me out. And now I'm wrong. I feel wrong all the time. My heart beats backwards, not forwards. Part of my head is still in the jelly, and that hurts. The ink follows me. I can see it with my blind eye. Wakes me up at night. Why did you do it?" Every interaction I had with Daryl, with no one else around, was like this. Nonsense accusations paired with threats of physical violence. I dreaded the occasions where he'd be capable of getting me alone. Holidays, birthdays, family reunions. They all inspired a burning, unspeakable worry that would smolder in my chest like a hot lump of coal. Thankfully, as we aged, I gained agency over my life. If I didn't want to be alone with Daryl, that was my choice. Once I was in high school, no one would just plop us in a room, close the door, and ask us to play nice. Eventually, my unhinged cousin became a distant trauma, fading into the white noise of adult life. I moved out, went to college, then to law school. Got a good job. Paid for a nice condo with the money from that job. From what my mom would tell me, Daryl still lived at home. Worked at a car wash. Still reserved, still quiet, still pleasant enough. Got in with the wrong crowd, though, apparently. Nothing to do with drugs, violence, or sex. It was something else. Despite being a notorious gossip, Mom never gave me any details. All she ever told me was that it was really scaring my aunt. After all that, she'd tell me how proud of me she was, and how she would brag to her friends about how much I made of myself. She'd never directly say it, but Mom only ever told me she was proud after expounding on how much of a fuck-up Daryl was. The implication was loud and clear. I was great, but I was especially asterisk great compared to my cousin, and that meant she was asterisk better than our aunt. I hated my mom's toxic pride. I pursued a career as a lawyer because I liked it, and it fulfilled me, but that didn't make me any better than Daryl. Life is not a game of prestige. It felt fucked up to enjoy my position, that much more on account of Daryl being seen as societally deficient, even if he tormented me as a child. I hoped that, whatever he was doing, however he was living his life, he was happy. More than that, though, I hated the comparison because it linked me with him. I just wanted to be my own person, left alone. When Daryl arrived on my doorstep with the tin of needles in his hand, I hadn't seen or heard from him in over a decade. Once he lost consciousness, I reached my uninjured hand into his jacket pocket to retrieve my phone. 911, what's your emergency? Minutes later, the EMTs rushed into my apartment and took over the resuscitation efforts, which was a tremendous relief. Between the shock, the terror, and the broken wrist, I'm sure my one-handed CPR was piss-poor at best. As I was stepping out the front door, escorted by one of the EMTs, I noticed something violently peculiar. Next to Daryl's body, face now pale and blue from the blood loss, I spied the lid of the black tin lying next to his hand, but it looked different. What I saw made no earthly sense. Initially, I attributed the discordance to a false memory, but I know now that what I noticed had significance, even if I still don't understand exactly what that significance was as I type this. The golden design that had been present on the tin only 10 minutes prior was now gone. Vanished like it had never been there in the first place. Hours later, discharged from the emergency room, wrist newly casted, I thought it was all over. I felt like I was free from him. He was dead, so the link was broken. Finally, I'd be left alone. I was sorely mistaken. Whatever Daryl had done, it continued despite his death. Maybe even because of his death. A sacrifice for a curse. A day later, I opened my apartment door to find 2 detectives standing outside. They instructed me to follow them to their car. I needed to answer a few questions about my cousin's death, and they requested I answered those questions at the police station. Truthfully, though, it wasn't a request. I was going to the station one way or the other. It was just a matter of how I was getting there and what shape I wanted to arrive in. I elected to avoid whatever force they had in mind if I refused and accompanied them to their idling sedan. I wasn't sure what they planned on asking me. Daryl arrived unannounced to my apartment, pulled my phone away from me before I could call 911, and then proceeded to ingest handfuls upon handfuls of sharp needles until he died from the internal bleeding. I didn't know much more than that. To my complete and absolute bewilderment, I was placed in an interrogation room when we arrived at the station. I was the prime suspect in Daryl's murder and the detectives were looking for a confession. "Listen, we know you did this, Lenny," one detective shouted, slamming a hairy fist onto the metal table. "What the fuck are you talking about? He swallowed the goddamned needles?" "Yes, but," started the other detective. "You made him do it." I leaned back in my chair, wide-eyed, stunned into silence. These detectives were lunatics. A second later, the hairy-fisted detective parroted the statement. The same statement that Daryl had made right before he died. "Yes, you made him do it." Initially, I wasn't worried. Disturbed by the outlandish accusation, sure, but not worried. I went to law school. They had *0 evidence, and I had no motive. None of it made a lick of sense. What was there to be concerned about? That changed when I called my mother from the station's pay phone. "Lenny," she sobbed into the receiver. "I can't believe you made him do that." Numbly, I hung up, listening to her tiny static wails as I placed the phone back on the hook. The judge considered me a flight risk and therefore refused to offer bail. So I remained there, trapped in the county jail, indicted for Daryl's murder, with the only evidence against me the unanimous belief that I made him do it. The trial was a sham, an absolute fucking travesty of justice. I watched in horror as the prosecution called friends and family to the stand, who all had the same thing to say. An unending parade of baseless insanity. He made him do it. I just know it. When it was the defense's turn, my lawyer didn't even bother to call me to the stand. He just ceded to the prosecution. "Even I know Lenny made him do it," he claimed. The judge then denied my request for self-representation. "I'll save you all the details of my attempts to fight back. It's unnecessary and will only rile me." I think, at this point, it would be obvious what the response was. After 3 days of that, the jury didn't even leave the room to deliberate. They looked at each other, shook their heads in near unison, and delivered their verdict. "We find the defendant guilty." Without a second thought, the judge handed down his sentencing. 20 years to life. "May God have mercy on your soul." The gavel banged against the wood, its sound reverberating around the room like church bells before a hanging, and the bailiff ushered me out the door. That was 2 months ago. Since then, I've spent my days adjusting to the nuances of a maximum security prison, appealing my verdict, and attempting to figure out what the hell Daryl did to everyone. So far, no luck on any front. Courts have universally denied my appeals. Prison has been a near impossible adjustment. I still don't understand the mechanics of what my cousin has done to me, not one bit. Then, there was what happened a few nights ago. A loud tapping jolted me awake. The familiar sound of a baton rapping on the closed window at the top of my cell door continued as I rubbed sleep from my eyes. One of the correction officers then pulled down the cover, revealing only his chin. He called my name, demanding I report to the door, despite the fact that it must have been 2 or 3 in the morning. I dangled my feet off the top bunk, lowering myself carefully onto the floor below, hoping not to incur my cellmate's wrath by waking him up. He was a light sleeper. In my groggy state, I misjudged the distance to the floor, rattling the bunk beds as I fell. My cellmate didn't wake up. Not to the tapping, not to me falling, not to the miniature earthquake that traveled through the metal bed frame as I attempted to soften my fall. Something was off. I pulled myself up and tiptoed towards the door. As I approached, I couldn't see the particular that was standing outside. There was just a disembodied jaw smiling at me through the partition. When he spoke again, It wasn't with the same voice he had used to call me over. You do understand now, don't you, Lenny? I'd recognize that terrible melody anywhere. It's a tune that bounced against the inside of my skull like a pinball, day in and day out. Daryl, how? I stuttered. One more chance, Lenny. Do you understand? In an instant, my heart raced and my blood began to boil. Sweat poured down my face.